Have you ever read a story that just made you laugh out loud and then, I mean, literally on the exact same page, you just gasp in horror?
Oh, yeah. It's a wild feeling.
Right. Because usually, when we talk about literature or, well, really any kind of media you consume, there's this underlying expectation of clear emotional
Yeah,
boundaries.
particularly.
We kind of rely on genre categories to tell us how to feel.
Yeah.
Like you pick up a comedy because you want to laugh, right?
Exactly. Or you put on a thriller to get your heart rate up.
Yeah. The author or the director is basically pointing the way and saying, here is the emotion you should be experiencing right now.
It's a very binary system, really. It's
Mm.
clean. And I think most importantly, it's comforting. We like our emotional experiences to be highly legible.
Oh, for sure.
We want to be able to categorize them neatly on a bookshelf or, in a streaming algorithm. So when the boundaries blur, it makes us genuinely uncomfortable.
It does. But then you step into the world of American Southern Gothic fiction, and suddenly those clean, comforting categories are they're completely shattered.
Oh, absolutely obliterated.
Yeah, you're navigating this literary landscape that is, well, honestly, it's terrifyingly hilarious.
Yeah.
You find yourself chuckling at something and then immediately feeling guilty for laughing because something deeply grotesque just happened.
It is the absolute definition of a tonal tightrope walk. You're balancing on this razor-thin wire between the comedic and the macabre.
Right.
And arguably, no one in the history of American letters walked that tightrope better than the subject of our deep dive today.
Seriously. So welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we are completely immersing ourselves in the life, the mind, and the incredibly shocking oeuvre of Flannery O'Connor.
An absolute titan.
Yeah, she was an American fiction writer who lived from 1925 to 1964. And what we're going to explore today with you is a really profound question. We're looking at how exactly an author's lived reality, their severe physical limitations, their intensely frustrating family dynamics, their deepest spiritual beliefs, how all of that serves as the ultimate inescapable context for their art.
It's a vital question to ask, especially with O'Connor.
Yeah.
Because with some authors, you can sort of separate the art from the artist.
Right, you can read it in a vacuum.
Exactly. You can read their work in a vacuum. But with O'Connor, you simply cannot separate the fiction on the page from the intensely confined physical and emotional room that she was writing from.
You really can't. And we have a seriously rich stack of materials to unpack for you today to show this. We're going to be looking at excerpts from 3 of her absolute most famous short stories.
The heavy hitters.
Oh, yeah. A Good Man is Hard to Find, Good Country People, and Everything That Rises Must Converge.
Incredible stories.
But we aren't just reading the stories, right? We also have her personal letters and essays, which, let me tell you, are incredibly revealing.
So revealing. They really pull back the curtain.
Yeah, and to help us make sense of it all, we have 3 fascinating pieces of modern literary criticism. We're pulling from Mary Gordon, Annie Ruman, and Eileen Pollock.
Great essays.
And we even have some visual context provided in our sources, which is cool. It's this striking image of a large number 8, which marks the chapter of the literary textbook we're analyzing, and it's paired with a 1962 photograph of O'Connor on her family farm, which was called Andalusia.
I am so glad we have that photograph as a touchstone.
Right.
It really grounds everything we're going to talk about today. It takes her out of the realm of abstract literary genius and places her in a very specific physical reality.
It really does. So our mission today is to figure out how a quiet, chronically ill woman living with her mother on a rural Georgia dairy farm managed to write some of the most violently shocking, darkly hilarious, and honestly spiritually complex fiction of the 20th century.
It's quite the paradox.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to understand the shocking events in her stories, and believe me, they are genuinely shocking,
Oh, yeah.
we have to understand the physical and emotional reality she existed in every single day. We need to look at the room she was trapped in.
Precisely. We really have to look past the persona she presented to the literary world and examine the actual person.
Right.
Because the inescapable core fact of Flannery O'Connor's life is that it was tragically cut short. She died at the age of 39.
Wow. 39, that's just so young.
It is. The cause was lupus, which is a really severe autoimmune disease. And what makes that even heavier emotionally is that it's the exact same disease that killed her father when she was a teenager.
Oh, man. So she knows exactly what this diagnosis means for her.
Exactly.
It's not just a vague illness, it's a very specific, agonizing timeline she's been handed.
Right. Her diagnosis came when she was in her mid-20s, which was just as her writing career was really taking off.
Of course.
And because of the debilitating nature of this illness, she was forced to leave the independent life she was building and return home. She had to go live at Andalusia, which is her family's dairy farm in Milledgeville, Georgia.
Right, back to the farm.
Yeah, and if you look closely at that 1962 photograph we mentioned, you don't see like a glamorous author holding a martini glass at a New York party.
No, not at all.
You see a woman standing on the porch of a farmhouse, leaning very heavily on aluminum crutches.
Yeah, those crutches are such a stark visual anchor. It completely strips away the romantic myth of the globetrotting famous writer.
Absolutely.
And the critic Mary Gordon, in her essay, actually describes the reality of the room behind that porch. She describes it as having a single, dark, wooden, monastic bed.
Monastic. Yeah.
Heavy, unyielding blue drapes. I mean, it sounds incredibly claustrophobic. It's a life defined by severe physical restriction.
It is. And that physical restriction is really the key that unlocks so much of her work, because it forced her into this state of deep involuntary dependence on her mother. Yes, Regina Klein O'Connor. And the dynamic between these two women was, well, complicated, to say the least.
Oh, I bet.
The critic, Annie Ruman, paints a highly nuanced, often very tense picture of Regina.
So what was Regina actually like? Because I'm picturing this brilliant, subversive writer having to move back into her childhood bedroom. And, that never goes well, even without a terminal illness hanging over it.
Right, it's a recipe for disaster.
Mm.
Ruman notes that Regina was a patrician woman. She was fiercely proud of her lineage. She was deeply status-obsessed, a woman who hosted local garden clubs and cared immensely about social appearances.
Okay, very proper Southern lady.
Very. She was the manager of the dairy farm, and so by default, she became the manager of her daughter's life.
Wow. Ruman actually points out in the text that Regina was more Klein than O'Connor.
Yes.
Like, she displayed all the Klein family portraits in her parlor as this visible, undeniable claim to honorable Southern heritage. She liked things tidy, she liked things respectable, and here she has this daughter living in her house who writes about serial killers and freaks and con artists. That has to create some serious friction.
The friction was immense. It really was. Ruman points out that Regina was proud of Flannery, but in a very specific, superficial way.
Like she liked the accolades.
Exactly. She praised Flannery's public awards.
Yeah.
For instance, Regina casually mentioned a grant Flannery received from the Rockefeller Foundation on her Christmas cards.
Oh, classic.
Right. Why? Because, as Regina reportedly said, and this is a great quote, money talks.
Yeah.
And the name Rockefeller don't hurt a bit.
Wow. Just wow. So she liked the prestige, and she obviously liked the money, but did she actually get the writing? Did she understand what Flannery was doing?
Not at all. She fundamentally did not understand her daughter's art. In fact, she worked quite hard to repress what she found socially unacceptable about Flannery. Yeah. Ruman highlights a very jarring moment from O'Connor's letters that perfectly illustrates this. Regina actually told Flannery to stop talking, and I'm quoting from the letter here, like a nigger. Because if she spoke that way, away from home, people would wonder where she came from.
Oh, my God. That's a really intense quote to read in a letter. But it immediately shows you exactly what kind of social environment they were living in, right?
It does. It's
Yeah.
shocking to modern ears. But Ruman uses that specific quote to illustrate just how deeply concerned Regina was with propriety.
Right.
She was obsessed with maintaining their social standing and with adhering to the really rigid, highly segregated social codes of the era.
Yeah, she was terrified of looking low class.
Exactly. And you have to contrast that with Flannery, who had this acute, entirely unfiltered, almost X-ray vision of the world around her. Flannery was actively listening to the way people actually spoke.
The dialect.
Yes, the raw, unpolished dialect of the rural South. And she was absorbing it for her art. But her mother just saw it as a threat to their respectability.
It sounds like there was this intense, suffocating pressure to conform to a very specific, genteel Southern ideal.
Suffocating is the right word.
And the sources even mention that Regina gave Flannery career advice. Like, she literally told Flannery to write something that a lot of people like.
Yes.
Like, she wanted her daughter to be the next Margaret Mitchell and just write a sweeping romance like Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, just write something nice, dear.
Mm.
And O'Connor's reaction to that is deeply telling. She wrote in a letter that Her mother's suggestion left her shading and speechless, and she claimed it raised her blood pressure 140 degrees.
I don't blame her.
She vented to a fellow writer, saying, "All I can ever say is, if you have to ask, you'll never know."
That is so relatable.
Right. You really have to pause and synthesize what this environment means for a creative, brilliant mind. Her failing body forced her into an absolute physical dependence on a caretaker who not only didn't understand her life's work, but actively found it distasteful.
Yeah, she wished it were more commercially and socially palatable. Imagine that for a second. If you're listening, just put yourself in her shoes. You are a brilliant, globally recognized artist. You are exchanging letters with the greatest literary minds of your generation.
You're a genius.
Right. But physically, you're trapped in your childhood bedroom. You have to ask your mother to help you out of bed. And this is a mother who wishes you'd just write a nice, simple love story.
It's maddening.
It makes me wonder, I mean, is her fiction, with all its dark, twisted violence, is it just a very sophisticated diary of teenage revenge against her mom?
You know, it's a highly compelling question, and Annie Ruman explores exactly that avenue of speculation in her critical essay.
Oh, she does?
Yeah, Ruman suggests that this trapped, dependent dynamic created an immense psychological pressure cooker. O'Connor couldn't escape. She wrote a brilliant line in one of her letters, she said, "I have never been anywhere but sick. In a sense, sickness is a place. I come from a family where the only emotion respectable to show is irritation. In some, this tendency produces hives. In others, literature. In me, both."
Hives and literature. That is such a sharp, self-deprecating line.
It really is.
It's funny, but when you think about it, it points to something incredibly dark.
It points to a profound stifling of the self. Ruman argues that the violence you see in O'Connor's stories might actually be the explosion of everything she couldn't say at the breakfast table.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. She couldn't rebel by packing a bag and moving to New York.
Because of her health.
Right. She couldn't rebel physically because she could barely walk. She was bottled up by the cultural codes of the South, by the strict Catholic respect for elders, and by her own failing immune system. So where does all that energy go?
It goes onto the page.
Exactly. She lodged her deep discontent in these bold, incredibly violent stories, filled with what Ruman calls intolerable parents and murderous children.
That makes total sense.
The landscape of her fiction became the only room she could keep untidy. It was the only space in her entire existence that she could fully, ruthlessly control.
Wow, the only room she could keep untidy. I love that phrasing. She couldn't yell at her mother for fussing over the garden club, so she wrote characters who literally assault their mothers or tear down their entire worldview.
Bingo.
But as we look at the source material, this isolation and physical vulnerability didn't just cause general familial frustration. It directly led to one of her most famous, most cynical, and deeply personal stories, which involves a totally devastating, specific romantic encounter.
Yes. We need to shift now from her general physical entrapment to a highly specific, profoundly humiliating moment of physical vulnerability.
Okay.
Because understanding how she transmuted that raw, personal pain into brilliant fiction is really the key to understanding her genius.
Yeah.
This brings us to the backstory of her remarkable short story, Good Country People.
Okay, the backstory here, which is detailed in the sources, is just unbelievable. I mean, the critic, Mary Gordon, reveals a biographical anecdote that genuinely shocked me when I read it.
It's brutal.
It is. So, a Danish book salesman who worked for O'Connor's publisher visited her at the farm in Andalusia. They apparently went for a drive, and at some point, he kissed her.
But it's the aftermath of that kiss, the details of it, that are so crucial.
Right.
According to Mary Gordon, who heard this recounted by a Jesuit scholar who actually tracked this Danish salesman down years later, the salesman was horrified by the encounter.
Horrified?
He claimed that O'Connor didn't know how to kiss. He explicitly said she gave him teeth instead of soft lips, making him feel like he was kissing a skull.
Wait, a book salesman actually said that she kissed like a skull.
Yes.
The cruelty of that assessment, especially knowing she's battling a terminal illness that is literally wasting her body away, is just breathtaking.
It is incredibly cool. And it gets worse. He was apparently terrified that she was in love with him, so he quickly fled back to Denmark.
Oh my gosh.
And then, 6 months later, he wrote her a letter to announce that he was engaged to someone else.
So she gets this letter. She's been physically rejected in the most humiliating way possible, and now she gets this engagement announcement. What does she do? How does she process that?
Well, she doesn't write a sad diary entry. She sits down And within a matter of days of receiving that engagement letter, she writes, "Good country people."
Days.
Days. And here is the kicker. She actually sends the manuscript to the Danish salesman and tells him not to think the story is about him, even though the primary villain in the story is a manipulative traveling salesman.
That is just incredible. The translation of her real-life pain into art here is so fast and so razor-sharp.
It's immediate.
So let's look at the actual story she produced from this. It features a protagonist named Holga. But she wasn't born Holga, right?
No, she was born with the name Joy. But when she was 21, she went to the courthouse and legally changed her name to Holga, specifically because she felt it was the ugliest name she could possibly think of.
Of course.
Her mother, Mrs. Hopewell, is appalled by this. She thinks the name Holga sounds like the broad blank hull of a battleship.
Which is such a brilliant, evocative description. The broad blank hull of a battleship. So Holga is a 32-year-old woman. She has a very weak heart, so weak that the doctors have told her she isn't expected to live past 45.
Right.
And she has an artificial leg from a hunting accident when she was a child. But she also happens to have a PhD in philosophy.
A very important detail.
Yes. And she is just radiating anger. She wears this faded cowboy sweatshirt everywhere. She deliberately stomps around the house to make her wooden leg sound as loud and intrusive as possible. And she generally treats her mother and their hired help, the Freemans, with absolute intellectual contempt.
It's important to note here that O'Connor mentioned in a letter to a friend that she identified most closely with Holga out of all her characters.
Really?
Yeah. Holga is a very clear projection of O'Connor herself into this tragicomic fictional landscape.
I can see that.
Both are highly educated women trapped on a rural farm with a mother who doesn't understand them. Both are dealing with severe physical disabilities, and both use their intellect as a shield.
Right. So into this incredibly tense household arrives Manly Pointer. He's this tall, gaunt, very naive-seeming young man selling Bibles door to door.
Right, the traveling salesman.
Exactly. He's wearing a bright blue suit and yellow socks. And he manages to get his foot in the door by claiming to Mrs. Hopewell that he has the exact same heart condition as Holga.
Which immediately lowers Holga's guard, although she still views him with total intellectual superiority.
She totally looks down on him.
She looked at this simple country boy selling Bibles, and she decides she is going to seduce him.
Yes, she literally plots it out in her head. She imagines seducing him, letting him feel intense remorse because he's this innocent Christian boy, and then taking that remorse and changing it into a deeper philosophical understanding of life.
She thinks she's in total control.
Yeah, she thinks she's this masterful, detached genius playing chess with a toddler. So they go on a picnic, and she leads him up into a barn loft. But the tables turn so fast, it gives you whiplash.
They do. Once they are isolated in the hayloft, Manly pushes her to say she loves him. And when she finally reluctantly does, he demands proof. He asks to see where her wooden leg joins on.
Which is such a massive escalation.
It's an incredibly intimate, violating request. The narrator notes that Holga is as sensitive about her artificial leg as a peacock is about his tail. She takes care of it as someone else would take care of their soul.
Wow.
It's the core of her vulnerability. But because she thinks she is in control of the situation, she yields to him. She shows him how the leg detaches. He takes it off, sets it out of her reach, and then flatly refuses to give it back.
And then comes the twist, the reveal that just drops your stomach.
He opens his Bible, but it's not a real Bible. It's hollowed out.
Oh, man.
Inside, there's a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of playing cards with obscene pictures on them, and a box of condoms. He offers her a drink.
And Holga is completely paralyzed, not just physically, because she literally doesn't have her leg, but mentally. Her entire understanding of reality has just collapsed. She gasps at him, "Aren't you just good country people?" Like she's trying to desperately hold on to the cliche her mother always uses.
And Manly's final devastating response shatters whatever is left of her worldview. He packs her artificial leg into his valise, looks down at her, and says, "You ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing ever since I was born."
That line is just chilling.
He reveals that he is a total fraud. He's a predator who goes around collecting interesting things from vulnerable people. He casually mentions he once got a woman's glass eye doing this.
Ugh, gross.
And then he just climbs down the ladder and leaves her stranded in the dusty hayloft.
It's like, imagine someone with 3 Ivy League degrees who thinks they know everything about game theory and human behavior, walking down the street and getting completely scammed by a street hustler playing 3-card Monte.
That's a perfect analogy.
She thought her massive intellect was absolute armor, but her physical body was the weak point. But here's the thing I keep wondering about this story. O'Connor explicitly said she identified with Holga. So why does she punish her own avatar so brutally? Why write such an intensely humiliating defeat for a character based on yourself?
That is the crucial question, and it gets to the heart of what O'Connor is doing philosophically. She is exploring the absolute failure of intellectual hubris.
Okay.
Helga is profoundly arrogant. Earlier in the story, she quotes the 17th century philosopher Malebranche to her mother, shouting, "We are not our own light." She highlights passages from Martin Heidegger about how science wishes to know nothing of nothing.
Right, she's very well read.
Yes, Helga thinks that because she has read dense philosophy and embraced academic nihilism, she has seen through all the foolish illusions of the world. She believes her academic understanding of nothingness makes her strong and untouchable.
Wait, let's break that down for the listener for a second. What do you mean by academic nihilism? How is that different from what Manly Pointer is doing?
Academic nihilism is theoretical. Helga has read about the meaninglessness of the universe in a textbook. She uses it as a badge of superiority to look down on her mother's simple religion. But it's safe. It's an idea.
Ah, I see.
O'Connor uses Manly Pointer to show that intellectual academic nihilism is utterly weak and defenseless when confronted with real, lived, predatory nihilism.
Right, because Manly isn't reading Heidegger.
Exactly. Manly doesn't need to read philosophy to understand nothingness. He lives it every day. He embodies the sheer, terrifying emptiness of a world truly without morality or grace. Helga's PhD cannot protect her from a man who genuinely believes in nothing and acts on that belief to steal a disabled woman's prosthetic leg just for sport.
That is so dark.
O'Connor is saying that intellect is no substitute for actual lived experience, and it is certainly no substitute for spiritual grace.
So if we tie this back to the real-world anecdote, the humiliation of the Danish salesman rejecting her, saying she kissed like a skull, she takes that intense private physical rejection and turns it into a massive philosophical takedown of her own intellectual defenses. Exactly.
She is basically saying to herself, "You think you're so smart. Let's see how smart you are when the world actually comes for you." It is incredibly brave, ruthless writing.
It is. She is completely unsparing with herself. She doesn't let herself off the hook. And if we connect this deeply personal story to the bigger picture, we see something fascinating.
What's that?
While Helga's punishment in the hayloft is deeply internal and psychological, O'Connor soon turns her piercing gaze outward. She takes this exact same brutal dismantling of intellectual hubris and applies it to the broader social fabric of the American South.
Yeah, this idea of being trapped in a bubble of your own perceived superiority. It didn't just apply to Helga in the hayloft. O'Connor saw that exact same dynamic playing out on a massive societal scale.
On a cultural scale, yes.
Which brings us to the shifting tectonic plates of the 1960s South, and a story that uses a mother-son dynamic to expose the immense hypocrisies of that era.
Everything that rises must converge.
Yes. In this story, we pan out from the isolated rural farmhouse and step onto the newly integrated city buses of the mid-20th century.
Right?
We are following two characters, Julian, a recent college graduate who considers himself highly intellectual and entirely free of racial prejudice, and his mother.
And his mother is a lot.
Julian's mother is a woman who is clinging desperately to her aristocratic plantation-owning heritage, the Chesney and Godhigh families, as she constantly reminds him, even though they are now impoverished and living in a dingy working-class neighborhood.
Julian is such a recognizable type, too. He's selling typewriters while he waits for his brilliant career as a writer to take off, and he is just absolutely saturated in depression and resentment toward his mother.
He really is.
He has to take her to the Y for a reducing class, a weight loss class, every Wednesday night because she flat out refuses to ride the newly integrated public buses alone. And on this particular night, the night the story takes place, she puts on this hideous new hat.
The hat is a crucial symbol.
It really is. It's green and purple, and Julian thinks it looks like a cushion with the stuffing spilling out. But his mother justifies buying it by saying, "I at least won't meet myself coming and going."
That phrase, "I won't meet myself coming and going," meaning she won't see anyone else wearing it, is a brilliant narrative set up by O'Connor for the situational irony that is about to follow.
It's so good.
So they get on the bus, and Julian deliberately tries to provoke his mother. He sits next to a well-dressed black man trying to aggressively show off his progressive liberal views to his mother.
Right, he's just using the guy.
Though if you read the text closely, he actually fails to connect with the man at all.
Yeah.
He just wants to use him as a prop to annoy his mom.
Meanwhile, his mother views everyone on the bus with this suffocating, condescending graciousness. She literally says to Julian at one point, "If you know who you are, you can go anywhere." She thinks her internal sense of class protects her.
She feels totally secure in her delusion.
And then a large black woman boards the bus with her little boy Carver. And here's where it gets surreal. The black woman is wearing the exact same hideous green and purple hat as Julian's mother.
It's a masterful visual symbol.
It's like a glitch in the Matrix. It forces these two completely segregated worlds to look directly in the mirror at each other.
Exactly. When Julian sees the identical hats, he is suddenly lit with joy. He feels that cosmic justice has been served, that fate has finally thrust a lesson upon his mother. He thinks her punishment, having to share her unique symbol of status with a black woman, exactly fits her pettiness.
He's so smug about it.
But his mother doesn't learn the lesson Julian so desperately wants her to learn.
Right. Instead of being humbled, she finds it amusing. She views the black woman not as an equal human being, but almost as a monkey that has somehow stolen her hat. And she focuses all her condescending affection on the little boy, Carver, playing peekaboo with him across the aisle.
And that profound misreading of the situation is what leads to the climax. They all get off the bus at the exact same stop. Julian's mother, acting out of this deeply ingrained paternalistic habit of the Old South, opens her purse and tries to give little Carver a bright new pen.
And Julian knows this is a terrible idea. He tries fiercely to stop her, hissing, "No," but she ignores him and does it anyway. And the black woman, who is already enraged by the mother's obvious condescension on the bus, absolutely explodes.
Justifiably so.
She strikes Julian's mother with this mammoth red pocketbook, knocking her completely flat onto the sidewalk, and shouts, "He don't take nobody's pennies."
The physical violence here isn't just an assault. It is the literal shattering of an entire social order. The mother's illusion of graciousness is violently rejected. And Julian, ever the arrogant intellectual, uses the moment to lecture his mother as she sits stunned on the pavement.
Oh, he's the worst.
He tells her, "The old manners are obsolete and your graciousness is not worth a damn." He tells her she has finally been forced to face reality.
But what Julian fails to realize while he's standing there smugly lecturing her is that the shock of the blow, combined with the total sudden collapse of her entire worldview, has literally broken his mother's brain.
Yes.
She starts acting completely strangely. She doesn't recognize Julian anymore. She tries to walk in the wrong direction and starts asking for Grandpa and her old black nurse, Caroline. She is retreating into her childhood. And then she crumples to the pavement, having suffered a massive stroke.
And in that moment, the power dynamic entirely flips. Suddenly, Julian goes from being this smug, detached intellectual to a terrified little boy screaming for help, running blindly down a dark street, calling out for his mama.
I have to push back on Julian for a second because reading the story, he is just as terrible as she is, right? Before the stroke, he's actually gleeful when his mother gets hit. He feels vindicated.
Julian is profoundly flawed. O'Connor does not spare him. The text describes him as living in a mental bubble, where he established himself to be safe from the general idiocy of his fellows.
Yeah, that bubble.
He thinks his college education makes him superior to everyone in his hometown. But he is totally ineffective. He has no real black friends. The story notes his attempts to make them are incredibly awkward, stilted, and patronizing. He doesn't actually care about integration or equality. He just wants to use the shifting social dynamics to antagonize his mother.
Now, we have to be careful and impartial here, looking exactly at what our sources tell us about the author's intent. And just to be super clear to you listening, we are completely impartial here. We're just reporting what the source is. And O'Connor herself said we're not endorsing any political side.
Absolutely.
O'Connor is dealing with the extremely volatile issue of racial segregation and the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But she doesn't write a standard moralistic tale where the progressive, forward-thinking son is the hero and the racist mother is the one-dimensional villain.
Precisely. And this is a very important point regarding her literary approach. In a letter to a friend discussing this specific story, O'Connor explicitly states her position. She writes that she gets away with this story because she says, "A plague on everybody's house as far as the race business goes."
A plague on everybody's house.
She is not endorsing Julian's smug, detached, theoretical liberalism any more than she is endorsing the mother's paternalistic, deeply ingrained racism. Both are shown to be completely insufficient, flawed ways of dealing with the complex reality of human beings.
Julian's intellectual detachment completely fails him, just like Helga's philosophy degree failed her in the hayloft. The ending of the story explicitly states that the tide of darkness sweeps Julian into the world of guilt and sorrow. His protective mental bubble is burst just as violently as his mother's delusion of graciousness.
And that brings us to a really critical juncture in understanding her work. We keep seeing these moments of extreme violence, a stolen prosthetic leg, a physical assault with a pocketbook leading to a fatal stroke.
Yeah, a lot of violence.
To achieve this kind of precise, devastating thematic payload, where she simultaneously condemns both the mother's archaic graciousness and the son's modern arrogance, O'Connor couldn't just rely on raw emotion or biographical venting.
Right.
She had to have a masterful, highly disciplined grip on literary craft.
How do you construct these scenes without them just feeling like cheap slasher movie shock value?
Right, she had to have a specific technique. So let's look at how she actually constructed these stories. We're going to dive into the art of the shock. We're looking at her craft, her time with the famous Iowa Writers' Workshop, and her absolute most famous, most analyzed story. A Good Man is Hard to Find.
A Good Man is Hard to Find is perhaps one of the most anthologized and debated short stories in all of American literature.
For good reason.
The setup is deceptively simple. It follows a family from Atlanta going on a road trip to Florida for vacation. The family includes Bailey, his rather passive wife, their two incredibly obnoxious, disrespectful children, and Bailey's manipulative, talkative grandmother. And the grandmother is the catalyst for everything. She doesn't want to go to Florida. She wants to go visit her connections in East Tennessee. To get her way, she tries to scare the family out of going south by reading them a newspaper article about an escaped serial killer known as the Misfit, who is reportedly headed toward Florida.
But Bailey ignores her, and they go toward Florida anyway. The grandmother, who is deeply obsessed with always appearing as a lady, secretly brings her cat, Pity Singh, hidden in a basket in the back of the car.
Which is such a grandmother thing to do.
It is. During the drives, she wakes up from a nap and convinces Bailey to turn down an abandoned dirt road to look for an old plantation house with a secret panel that she remembers from her youth.
And as they are bouncing down this deeply rutted dirt road, suddenly she has a horrifying realization. The house she's remembering, the one with the secret panel, isn't even in Georgia. It's in Tennessee. She
Why?
made a massive mistake.
That sudden, embarrassing realization causes her to physically jerk her feet, which upsets the basket holding the cat. Pity Singh springs out, attaches itself directly to Bailey's neck while he's driving, and he loses control of the car.
It's chaos.
They flip the car and crash into a ditch. Miraculously, no one is killed in the crash, but they are stranded in the middle of nowhere. And then a slow, hearse-like automobile drives up over the hill, and 3 men get out.
And it is the Misfit and his 2 henchmen. Now, they might have actually survived this encounter, except the grandmother, with incredibly terrible judgment, immediately recognizes him from the newspaper and shrieks, "You're the Misfit!"
Which, of course, seals their doom.
Because now he has been identified, he has to eliminate the witnesses. What follows is one of the most chilling, methodical sequences in modern fiction. The Misfit has his henchmen take the family members, Bailey, the son, the mother, the children, into the woods in pairs and systematically execute them.
You just hear the gunshots off stage.
Yes. Meanwhile, the Misfit stays by the ditch, having a conversation with the grandmother. And this dialogue between them is just unbelievable. The grandmother is desperately, frantically trying to save her own life. She keeps relying on all her superficial markers of class to bargain with a psychopath.
She thinks she can charm him.
Yeah, she tells him, "I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood." She tells him to pray, insisting that Jesus will help him.
But the Misfit is not common thug. He is a deeply philosophical killer. He tells her about his life. He was a gospel singer, been in the armed services, been in a tornado, seen a man burnt alive. He tells her he was sent to the penitentiary for a crime he can't even remember committing.
He's lived a lot.
And he explains his twisted philosophy. He realized that crime don't matter. You can do one thing or you can do another. Kill a man or take a tire off his car, because sooner or later you're going to forget what it was you've done and just be punished for it.
And then he says this incredible, profound thing about Jesus. He says, Jesus thrown everything off balance. He argues that if Jesus actually did what he said he did, if he truly raised the dead, then there's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. But if he didn't, if it's all a lie, then there's nothing to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left by killing somebody or doing some other meanness to him. He concludes, no pleasure but meanness.
It is a stark, terrifying binary. And as she hears the final gunshots killing her family in the woods, the grandmother's superficial worldview completely collapses. She sinks into the ditch feeling dizzy, and right before he shoots her, she has the profound, inexplicable epiphany.
It's the climax of the whole story.
Her head clears for an instant. She looks at the misfit who is wearing her dead son's shirt and seems about to cry, and she says, "Well, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children." She reaches out and physically touches his shoulder.
And he springs back as if a snake has bitten him and shoots her 3 times through the chest. And then, as he's cleaning his glasses, he says the line that basically defines O'Connor's entire career. She would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life.
It's a breathtaking conclusion.
It really is.
But let's look at how O'Connor pulls this off technically. How does she make us feel the shock of that moment without it feeling cheap? The critic Eileen Pollock notes that O'Connor's time at the Iowa Writers' Workshop heavily influenced her craft.
Ah, right, Iowa.
At Iowa, she was steeped in new criticism, guided by major literary figures like Robert Penn Warren and Cleanth Brooks, and heavily influenced by her close friendship with the novelist Caroline Gordon.
Wait, I want to pause on the literary theory for a second. Pollock says O'Connor used an effaced third-person narrator. What does that actually mean in plain English, and how does that change what the listener or the reader is experiencing?
That's a great question. An effaced narrator means the narrator is essentially invisible. The narrative voice never intrudes into the story to say, "I think," or to pass explicit moral judgment on the characters.
Cool.
The narrator doesn't tell you the grandmother was a foolish woman. The narrator just objectively describes what she does and says and lets the reader draw the conclusion. Furthermore, the narrator speaks in a very precise, formal, standard English. O'Connor reserved the thick, colorful Southern dialect entirely for the dialogue of the characters.
Oh, I see. So the narrator isn't speaking like a local townsperson.
Exactly. Pollock points out that O'Connor did this highly intentionally. Her mentor, Caroline Gordon, warned her that letting the narrator slip into regional dialect lowers the tone of the story. It destroys the necessary tension between the highly perceptive objective narrator and the deeply flawed subjective characters.
That makes a lot of sense.
By keeping the narrator detached and effaced, O'Connor forces the reader to confront the horror of the events directly, without a comforting voice holding their hand and telling them how to feel about it.
It's the ultimate execution of the show don't tell rule. But I still have to ask about the violence. Listening to that plot, an entire family being methodically executed in the woods, it feels almost gratuitous. If she's trying to write about Grace, why does she need a literal bloodbath to do it?
O'Connor was asked this exact question constantly during her lifetime, and she gave a very clear defense of her methods in her essays. She wrote, and this quote is vital, "When you can assume that your audience holds the same beliefs you do, you can relax a little and use more normal means of talking to it. When you have to assume that it does not, then you have to make your vision apparent by shock to the hard of hearing you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large and startling figures."
To the hard of hearing you shout, that is a powerful justification.
She had a very specific, unwavering theological intent. O'Connor was a deeply Orthodox Catholic. But she was writing in the 1950s and 60s for an increasingly secular, or at least nominally Protestant, modern audience that she felt had lost touch with genuine spiritual stakes. She knew she couldn't just preach to them, they would close the book. She believed that the mystery of grace is immanent, meaning it operates within the concrete, messy details of the material world. To show the operation of grace to a reader who doesn't even believe in it, she had to use extreme physical situations to force the issue. As she put it, violence returns my characters to reality and preparing them to accept their moment of grace.
Okay, let me make sure I'm following this. Are you saying she believes you literally need a gun to your head to be a decent person? It sounds like she's using the misfit, a literal serial killer, as a bizarre instrument of divine intervention.
In her theological framework, yes, absolutely. Notice how O'Connor's characters often speak in empty, meaningless cliches. Mrs. Hopewell in Good Country People constantly says things like, "Nothing is perfect," and, well, it takes all kinds. The grandmother constantly repeats, "A good man is hard to find." These cliches are a defense mechanism. They are a way to avoid dealing with actual, painful, complex reality. The violence in O'Connor's stories acts as a harsh, undeniable solvent. It rips the polite cliches away and exposes the raw, terrifying truth beneath.
Because you can't use a cliche when someone is pointing a shotgun at your chest.
Exactly. Grandmother only realizes her true, profound connection to humanity, recognizing a murderer as one of her own children, when all her social pretenses, her hat, her respectable background are completely stripped away by the imminent, undeniable threat of death. The gun to the head burns away the ego and forces total honesty. It clears the path for grace.
That is heavy. And it brings us to a really compelling debate about her legacy, which is where we are going to wrap up our deep dive today. We need to talk about redemption versus forgiveness, because if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, okay, that's brilliant, but it is also incredibly dark. Is her vision of the world ultimately too harsh? Or is it exactly the kind of medicine we need?
This is where Mary Gordon's modern critique of O'Connor becomes incredibly poignant, and it offers a necessary counterweight to O'Connor's own theories. Gordon points out that O'Connor's stories are almost entirely devoid of comfort, kindness, or basic human empathy.
Yeah, there's no warmth.
Her characters are constantly denied the experience of grieving. Gordon writes a beautiful, challenging line. I have often wondered if people are more comfortable with violence than with grief. Violence is sharp, clear, bounded. Grief can be eternal. It percolates and permutates.
That is such a true observation. In A Good Man is Hard to Find, the whole family is slaughtered, the grandmother has her split-second epiphany, and then she dies.
Mm.
The story ends. We don't see anyone left behind to mourn them. We don't see Julian the next day trying to plan his mother's funeral or dealing with the agonizing guilt of his actions.
Gordon highlights the vast theological and emotional difference between redemption and forgiveness. In strict Orthodox Catholic theology, redemption is often viewed as a one-time, historical, often violent act, the crucifixion of Christ. It is a climactic, world-altering event. Forgiveness, however, is a daily, slow, messy, human-lived experience. You have to wake up every single day and choose to forgive the person who hurt you, or do the agonizing work of forgiving yourself. O'Connor is solely interested in the climactic moment of redemption, the moment of grace striking like lightning. She doesn't stick around for the physical therapy of forgiveness.
Let me bring up something from her letters that really underscores this. O'Connor had this intense exchange with the writer John Hawkes. They were arguing back and forth about the nature of the devil in literature.
Yes, that correspondence is incredibly revealing of her fundamental worldview. Hawkes apparently suggested to her that she wrote with the devil's will. He was viewing the devil as a subjective, modern concept, a romantic symbol of rebellion against the herd mentality.
Okay, kind of a metaphor.
O'Connor fiercely and immediately rejected this interpretation. She wrote back, insisting her devil is objective. She said, my devil has a name, a history, and a definite plan. His name is Lucifer, he's a fallen angel, his sin is pride, and his aim is the destruction of the divine plan.
So she literally believed the devil was a real active entity out to get you.
Yeah.
Not a metaphor, but a literal force roaming the earth.
She absolutely did. And you have to understand how that belief dictates her writing. If you believe that you are in an active daily war with a literal Lucifer for the eternal fate of your soul, then polite manners, social progress, and even the slow process of human grief seem incredibly trivial. You focus entirely on the life or death, eternal moments.
Right.
And if we relate this back to the very first thing we discussed, her own life living with terminal lupus, she literally didn't have the luxury of time for the slow percolation of grief. She lived at the absolute edge of eternity every single day of her adult life.
It's like, if I can make an analogy here, it's like she's a trauma surgeon who performs a radical life-saving amputation to save your soul. She just violently chops away your pride and your cliches, but then as soon as the surgery is over, she completely refuses to give you any painkillers or schedule any physical therapy afterward. The surgery is a success, your soul is saved, but the patient is just left bleeding and traumatized on the table.
Yes, and to push that surgeon analogy even further, O'Connor believes the tumor she is removing is our own ego, our own self-reliance. And she isn't using a sterile scalpel. She's using a rusty bone saw.
A rusty bone saw, yeah.
She leaves you bleeding on the table because, in her theological view, God is the only one who can stitch you up. Human comfort is just an anesthetic that keeps you from realizing you were dying in the first place. But Gordon's challenge to us, the readers, remains entirely valid. Do we prefer the dramatic, lightning bolt moments of realization? Or are we willing to do the quiet, unglamorous, difficult work of forgiving ourselves and others? O'Connor gives us the lightning, but she leaves the difficult aftermath entirely up to us.
It really forces you to think about your own moments of clarity. Are we waiting for a metaphorical car crash to make us appreciate the people around us, or can we do the slow, tedious work of loving them on a normal Tuesday?
Exactly. O'Connor's work is a necessary shock to the system, a defibrillator for the modern soul. But a defibrillator is not the entire ecosystem of human emotion.
Wow. Okay, let's distill this deep dive. Flannery O'Connor was a woman who took her severe physical pain, her frustrating, trapped life with a mother who cared more about appearances than art, and her incredibly deep orthodox religious convictions, and she forged them into a totally unique, unparalleled literary voice. She couldn't travel the world, she couldn't escape her bedroom, so she explored the deepest, darkest, most terrifying crevices of the human soul right from her dairy farm in Georgia.
She looked out at the world and saw a modern society that she believed was deaf and blind to the spiritual realities she held so dear. So, by shouting to the hard of hearing, by drawing large and startling figures in blood and dark humor, she woke us up to our own immense hypocrisies. She showed us that our academic intellect, our perceived social superiority, and our polite manners are absolutely no defense against the brutal, mysterious reality of grace.
So, if you're listening to this, whether you are prepping for a literature seminar or you're just insanely curious about why people are still obsessed with these dark, twisted stories, 70 years later, remember that O'Connor's work is always pointing the finger directly at you. She's asking you to find the secret panels and the intellectual bubbles in your own life and to dismantle them yourself before reality comes along and violently dismantles them for you.
And that is a terrifying, uncomfortable, but ultimately vital exercise for anyone to undertake.
It really is. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. O'Connor forces her characters to face the ultimate truth in their dying breath, or in a moment of total life-altering humiliation. But imagine, just for a second, if the grandmother had somehow miraculously survived that encounter with the misfit in the ditch. How does a person who has just had their entire superficial worldview violently shattered wake up and drink their coffee the next morning? How do you go about living a normal Tuesday after you've touched the absolute terrifying truth?
Thank you for taking the deep dive with us.